Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, can I thank the organisers of McGill for the honour of inviting me here this evening and pay a warm personal tribute to my good friend Joe for all the efforts he has made to make this such a success. And can I also say that in a funny way, tonight is closing a circle for me, because I was privileged to be a student in UCD with Peter Mayer in the 1970s. We were classmates. We didn't have the same ideological views, some of you may be interested to hear, but we were good friends. And so it came to be that a couple of years ago, I came here at the invitation again of Joe to deliver an address on recognising the Protestant tradition in Ireland, of which Peter was part. And I was very moved at the end when he said such nice things about me, given that we'd spent most of our student years saying such terrible things about each other. But he was a gentleman, and he is somebody whose thoughts and words, I think, still command our respect and demand our attention. His comments about the crisis in Ireland, which was developing when he was last here, are, I think, entirely true and correct. We have a tendency to seek to externalize the problems in our society when many of the value issues which have brought us unhappiness lie within ourselves. As Paul said there, the problem is inside out rather than top down in terms of reform and change. And it has been said that tonight and this year, 2012, is in many respects the anniversary of the beginning of the decade of turbulence which brought us from the Home Rule protest of the Ulster Covenant on the one hand to the Anglo-Irish Treaty on the other hand. And it's true. And our grandmothers and grandfathers, in many respects, struggled to create on this island, or this part of this island at any rate, a state which embodied all their ideals, and in particular, a state which embodied their pride and their patriotism. And those 10 years gave way to another period of 15 years from 1922 to 1937, in which, against the background of civil war, a new independent Irish state was crafted in very difficult circumstances by a generation of people who were very young and inexperienced in many respects, but who were driven by a sense of patriotism and pride for their country. And of course, it is the case that the huge divide which emerged between them in 1922 and 1923 in many respects crippled their efforts. But it has to be remembered too that by 1937 those wounds were slowly healing, and De Valera put before the Irish people what was his life's goal, which was a constitution based on the notion of popular sovereignty in this state, a free Irish independent sovereign state. And while everybody knows that they have rights as citizens under the Constitution, and that these are embodied and enshrined in a written Constitution which can't be amended except by the decision of the people, few enough people ever pay attention to Article 9(3) of the Constitution, a short paragraph which simply states, "Fidelity to the nation and loyalty to the state are fundamental political duties of all citizens." That's never spoken about, and indeed in my first exhibit here, which is Gerard Hogan's book on the Constitution, John M. Kelly's Irish Constitution, there is no commentary at all on that section of the Constitution, because it doesn't come really to be adjudicated on by the courts. But it does mean that our fundamental duty as citizens is that we owe our allegiance to our nation, and we give our loyalty to the free, independent Irish state that generation fought for, shaped and built over 2 decades from 1916 to 1937. Now, loyalty to the state is, as we've just heard in Joan's discourse, a concept which isn't often spoken about in current political discourse, and I have to say that I agreed with everything she said on this subject, and I'll come back to that if I may. It means loyalty to the Constitution, loyalty to the Oireachtas, loyalty to the presidency as an institution, the Dáil, I think, and I'm going to suggest to you later, the Seanad. Loyalty to the courts, loyalty to the rule of law, loyalty to the laws that we have chosen through our institutions to live by. And while many people clamour for the recognition and enforcement of their constitution and legal rights, there is a remarkable absence of public commentary about fulfilling our correlative duty of loyalty to the state. That is, that citizens uphold the law and pay their taxes, not campaigning to boycott taxes or seeking to own our media and influence our system while being tax émigrés abroad. There is also, and this is slightly more difficult, especially in present circumstances, the question of loyalty to the state's institutions. Those who hold office, such as the President, the members of Dáil Éireann and Seanad Éireann, and the judges, are entitled to receive our loyalty in that capacity precisely because we collectively have chosen them and put them there under our Constitution to discharge the various functions that they are given. I'm not speaking here of blind loyalty or unquestioning submission or obsequious deference. Our Constitution is based on this notion that the people are sovereign. The people choose the representatives through the ballot box. The Constitution itself is the expression of the will of the people and can be changed only by the people. And it acknowledges that the people are, in last analysis, what in Article 6 of the Constitution describes them as putting the people as entitled to designate the rulers of the state and in final appeal to decide all questions of national policy according to the requirements of the common good. That is the core principle of the Irish Constitution, that the people are sovereign and are the final determinants of everything in this state. And sometimes I think we should remind ourselves that those who we elect, to use the phrase, a slightly unfashionable phrase I suppose now, as our rulers, but it shows that they have authority, are chosen by us, and that they are, as Joan mentioned, trustees for our individual mandates as citizens expressed through the ballot box. At the last general election, there was an interesting non-event which I think we should ponder here tonight. A group of highly influential commentators and public figures met and examined the possibility that they would collectively seek elective office. They ultimately decided not to do so, and I don't criticise them for that, because that was their privilege. But their decision not to form a new party and not to contest the election does carry a deeper meaning. Those to whom they yielded up the political battlefield and those who were elected are collectively entitled by the fact that they did face election and were successful to our loyalty as the citizens who elected them, and that includes Joan. Those who had their chance and who opted out and who opted not to contest the election are not now to be regarded as some species of unsullied political virgins who are superior to those who actually sought out your mandate in the ballot box. Commentators should remember that by opting out of politics, they apply for a lower position in the hierarchy of constitutional loyalty and respect. And in the tsunami of public negativity and cynicism about elected politicians, which I decry, there's an ever-increasing likelihood that the good people in our society will be deterred from participating in politics, and that the political stage will be abandoned to be occupied by what I call skilled practitioners in the art of impunity. In short, we should be conscious that as the people who choose our politicians and as the people who owe a political duty of fundamental loyalty to our state, we don't transform anger and frustration into a collective disloyalty to our democracy dressed up as righteous indignation. We have a republic. It's our republic. We owe that republic our loyalty. We and we alone bear the ultimate responsibility and the ultimate power for the well-being of that republic. We don't have the option as citizens of turning our backs on our state. Now, I now know that what I'm going to say is going to be counterpoint to things that were said earlier here today, and I make no apology for that. Controversy is something I have an appetite for. But can I say this? One of the advantages of being late up here this afternoon was that I had the opportunity to listen to the radio and to hear what was happening. And therefore, I have to say what I say now, I believe, with passionate intensity. In today's newspapers, we read a letter from 6 notable and, I believe, patriotic public figures who have individually served the Irish nation and our state with fidelity and loyalty. Maurice Hayes, Mary Henry, John Murphy, Mary O'Rourke, Breed Rogers and Ken Whittaker. And I think collectively and individually, in very distinct ways, all of them could be said to have done this state some service. And they're calling on their fellow citizens to stand back from the proposed referendum to abolish Seanad Éireann and to reflect on whether that proposal is wise. They challenge us to consider whether it would not be preferable to grasp at long last the nettle of parliamentary reform to make the Seanad what it was always intended to be, a valuable counterpoint to the democratic process in Dáil Éireann. And I believe that their intervention is valuable and is important for the health of Irish democracy. Their loyalty to the state is not some wish to preserve a dysfunctional Seanad for old time's sake. They are challenging us, their fellow citizens, to strengthen our democracy and our state by radically transforming Seanad Éireann so as to enhance parliamentary democracy in Ireland itself. Now, in these matters, we have to be very careful of those people who engage in issue surfing on constitutional reform. Election promises to reduce the number of TDs by 20 have given way over 18 months to a reduction of 8. And I ask you to consider the following question, ladies and gentlemen. Do you think that will make a blind bit of difference when it comes into effect next year? Or is it a gesture designed to show that the political elite are sensitive to the feelings of anger and outrage in the population and are making some, in inverted commas, sacrifice in order to appease the anger and disillusionment of the electorate? I think it's the latter. Now, from the same stable comes the proposal to hold a referendum to abolish the Seanad. And can I just say a few things about that? Number one, Des O'Malley, who is here tonight, in 1986 asked myself and a fellow unelected Progressive Democrat barrister, Gerard Hogan, to draft him a bill to amend the Constitution to abolish Seanad Éireann. And myself and Gerard went off agreeing to carry out this function. And after about 3 or 4 weeks, we came back to Des and said, it can't be done without wrecking the Constitution. The only way to achieve it is to write a new Constitution. And so in 1986, we went through a very elaborate process, and you'll find it in the archives of the Irish Times if you go looking for it, to rewrite the entire Constitution without Seanad Éireann. It was a long and painstaking process. Our text had 3 references to God. But when South Dublin PDs proposed to put in a 4th reference to God and were defeated, the Progressive Democrats' new constitution went down in flames as taking God out of the Constitution. And I have to say, I was tempted at the time to say that God had appeared to me and had asked not to be in for a fourth time in our Constitution. But I thought that might be a bit flippant, especially in those days. But I brought here tonight, and it's available to you, a schedule of 75 separate amendments to the Constitution, which would be necessary if Seanad Éireann is simply deleted at this point. And I just want to tell you a few things about this proposal to amend the Constitution. Firstly, we can now decide with absolutely no constitutional amendment that we can reform Seanad Éireann to introduce a different electoral law that, to coin a phrase, would be to open up the Seanad rather than to close it down. A Seanad Reform Act introduced as a bill in early 2013 and enacted by the end of that year could allow every citizen a say by giving each citizen the right to opt to register to vote on each of the 5 panels in the Constitution or in the university panels to be reformed to include all universities. That right could also be given to Irish citizens in Northern Ireland, and it could also be given to Irish citizens, or at least some of them, who reside abroad, as is the case with university senators already. We could easily pass a Seanad Reform Bill which would hugely expand the electorate for each panel and create an elected Seanad which was independent of the dead hand of domination by the party politics of Dáil Éireann. We could provide for a real scrutiny of eligibility for candidacy by reason of public service and public standing in respect of the particular panel for which candidates would be selected. There's absolutely no reason why Oireachtas members and county councillors under the Constitution, which doesn't mention them in this context, that they alone should decide by statute who should sit in the Seanad. The problem with the Seanad so far results entirely from the decision of Dáil Éireann to control the membership of the Seanad and to subjugate it. It's not a problem with the Seanad itself or with the Constitution. It's a problem with those in Dáil Éireann who have chosen to keep the Seanad in the state it's in. Nor is there any reason why such a wider electorate for the Seanad should not kick in from the date of the next general election. If such a Seanad Reform Electoral Act was to come into law during the life of this Dáil, the newly reformed Seanad election system will give us a new reformed Seanad at exactly the same time as the next so-called slimmed-down Dáil is elected. So whatever is wrong with the current Seanad doesn't require constitutional amendment to remedy it, and to suggest that the Seanad cannot be reformed without a referendum is simply untrue. I want to tell you about another great untruth which is being propagated, and I heard it this evening in the car, on the radio, on the way up here. And that is that Seanad Éireann costs €25 million per annum, and as one government member claimed, and I think he was here earlier this afternoon, that this abolition would save us €125 million in the life of one Dáil. Now that untruth was cooked up by the following process. The entire cost of the Oireachtas was notionally computed and assigned pro rata to 166 Dáil deputies and 60 senators. And on that basis it was claimed that huge savings would result from abolishing the Seanad. But the truth, my friends, is very, very different. The real gross annual cost of Seanad Éireann is far, far less. The head of the Oireachtas Commission, the Clerk of Dáil Éireann, Kieran Coughlin, was asked about this on the 12th of January of this year. And he said that the gross direct cost of the Seanad was not 25 million, but was 9.2 million at most. And if you say that the 9.2 million that we spend per annum on the Seanad is an excessive cost, let me remind you of one thing, that most senators pay tax, and that the actual cost to the Senate to the taxpayer and the Exchequer of removing it would be probably closer to €5 million. And if €5 million is too much to pay for the institution to whose defence I will come in a moment, let me put another point to you. They're paid €60,000 each per annum, when most decent people who might seek election to a really independent Senate and who had another occupation in life, and after all, being a senator is not a full-time occupation, would probably be happy to do it for or the special advisors to government. Shannon Aaron of appointing ministers who are not TDs. Is that a thing that you all want? Just make it absolutely clear nobody who is not elected in a multi-seat constituency can be a minister in our system. There would be no protection against a Dáil majority for the President or the judiciary if they were threatened with removal. No other voice, nothing else to save them. A majority in the Dáil and a majority in the Shannon, a majority in the Dáil would suffice to get rid of the President, and it'll suffice to get rid of a judge under the Constitution. There'd be no chance for people who weren't TDs, experts in their area, to serve on Oireachtas committees or to be members of our Parliament in any capacity whatsoever. And here's a very interesting point, which most people, I have to say, and I was one of them until relatively recently, aren't aware of. Under Article 29 of our Constitution, we have given the two houses of the Oireachtas the right to surrender our veto on huge areas of EU policy. A resolution in Dáil Éireann is enough to move from unanimous voting to qualified voting, and to do various other things under the European treaties in relation to our system of criminal justice and the like. And the Seanad has been given a veto over the Dáil doing that. And do we want to sweep that away too, so that one afternoon a government under pressure gives in on the corporation tax matter and makes it a matter of QMV in Europe, with no right for anybody to go to the Supreme Court and say, sorry, this was a surrender of our sovereignty, a bridge too far, something that I don't agree with. And there will be no chance for citizens of Irish citizens in Northern Ireland or abroad to have any chance of voting for or be heard in our Parliament. Gordon Wilson, Breed Rogers, Seamus Mallon, John Robb, the Trinity professors who have received votes from outside Ireland traditionally over the year. All of those people will be told, sorry, no, your presence in our Parliament was surplus to requirement. We want a Parliament with Jackie Healy-Rae. We want a Parliament with Ming Flanagan. We want a Parliament with Matty McGrath. Those are the people we want to comment on our society. Do we want total domination of our system by the party whips, who have an absolute stranglehold on the business of Dáil Éireann? If you're an independent in Dáil Éireann and you're not a member of a technical group, you don't get to speak on any bill. This is the reality that we are now being invited to adopt by those who come before you today and say that in your interest they are making a sacrifice to get rid of Shannon Éireann. There's no chance of private members' bills, such as Mary Robinson's on contraception, such as David Norris's one on gay rights, and the Shannon Bill on civil partnership, unless the whips in Dáil Éireann give it fair wind. And these were the parliamentary events which moved Irish society on these issues, because there were minority voices who would never have succeeded in getting elected to Dáil Éireann, there to move them and there to make their statements at the heart of our democracy in our parliamentary institution for these propositions. That will be swept away. There's no real prospect, by the way, of developing any EU scrutiny. Enda Kenny came here 3 years ago, and he said at this event that he wanted to develop Shannon Éireann so that in the post-Lisbon Treaty situation, where the national parliaments of the member states have important scrutiny functions in relation to proposed EU legislation, he believed that Shannon Éireann should be used for that purpose, to bring expertise in those areas and reformed so that it could discharge those functions. Well, ladies and gentlemen, what happened? Shortly after he left here, there was a coup against him. It was unsuccessful. And shortly after that, again, he went to the President's dinner of Fine Gael and announced, without consulting anybody in his political party, that they were now committed to getting rid of Shannon Éireann. Who in the Dáil is going to spend the next 3 years scrutinising EU legislation? Is it Ming? Is it all these, or any of the people I've mentioned? Are they going to spend their time in some committee room discussing these matters as they see their rivals gaining an advantage on them in the 3, 4 or 5 seat constituency which they're forced to fight in the next election? And the simple answer is there will be no improvement and there will be no talent to bring to the party in relation to scrutiny of EU matters if we don't reform Shannon Éireann and make sure that all the talents that the Irish people can put in there will be put in there. I think, if you think about it, there will be no alternative voices in our parliamentary system, no improvement in the quality of our parliamentary democracy by getting rid of Shannon Éireann. And there will be total future dominance for what I call the messenger boy, multi-seat, local issue driven politics, which Peter Mayer spoke about, under the rigid control of party whips. And when you think about it, the more you think about it, the weaker the case to abolish the Shannon becomes. And secretly, most TDs and senators believe that abolition proposal is wrong. If you talk to them, as I do frequently, they don't believe in it. The majority of the Labour Party that I have ever met doesn't believe in it, and I won't embarrass Joan here. A clear majority of senators now opposes the change, and 2 Dáil parties have both said that they favour reform. And the government has now twice postponed the holding of a referendum, and we hear today brave words that they will put the issue before the people. But most of their members acknowledge that a referendum to abolish the Shannon while leaving the Dáil unreformed will quite likely be soundly defeated. And I'm confident, as somebody who loves my constitution and who believes in checks and balances, and who believes that a reformed Shannon could bring far more voices, not elected by county councillors and members of the Oireachtas, but elected by the people on a broad mandates to deal with broad aspects of Irish society. I'm confident that once this issue is put to the Irish people, they will reject out of hand a referendum to abolish Shannon Éireann as a gimmick, which it is. Now, my confidence that an abolition referendum will be defeated stems from a clear view that it would only serve to cement into position the present system of Dáil party politics, which is the system that has failed us, and that a single chamber based on that system would amount to a deformation rather than a reformation of our democracy. I also believe that the Shannon Reform Bill is the way forward, and that it will probably be entertained by the Shannon in the next few months, and that this will eventually put it up to government to decide whether they whip their TDs in Dáil Éireann to vote it down, because I believe it will be passed in Shannon Éireann, or whether they in favour of having a referendum to abolish Shannon Éireann. I don't think it will happen. But I'll say this to you. It won't just be a matter of contending with a few NGOs such as the ICCL and a few former Attorney Generals. And one of my friends in the Law Library calls us the fags. It won't be a matter of dealing with a small group like that. When people consider the real issues, the gimmickry and the issue surfing and the posing as friend of the people by mutilating our constitution will be abundantly clear. One member of our committee of 2, and it wasn't me, said that words to the effect that in constitutional terms, to use a dentist's analogy, getting rid of the Shannon will not be a filling. It'll be extensive root canal treatment and a fair few extractions. And I don't want to leave our constitution at the end of this a gap-toothed wreck with entire articles meaning nothing anymore, which would be the case if we abolish the Constitution. And I agree with T.K. Whittaker and his signatories today that we need a good debate on this issue. But I also agree with them that the real choice now is to put in place a really valuable citizens' initiative to improve the Oireachtas by reforming the Seanad rather than getting rid of it. And I think that our guiding principle in that respect should be, don't close the Seanad, open it. Now, I want to end by emphasising one thing. Those of us who are loyal to the Irish state should realise that we are privileged to have a fundamental law, a constitution, which is ours alone to change. And Exhibit 2, my friends, is the bound copy of the Constitution that was presented to me on the day that Articles 2 and 3 were reformed. It's a document of which I'm proud. It's a document which has been the charter for the emergence of a unique entity in Europe, a republic which has a written constitution changeable only by the people, and which every citizen can go to the courts and have enforced in his or her favour or the like. If you're talking about reform, remember this. The last government where Fine Gael and Labour were in power together asked for a document on constitutional reform and set up a review group. It's here. It set out all the issues and argued them in great detail one way or the other and set the issues for political decision. It's not talked about anymore, and instead of that we have a gimmick, a constitutional convention with 100 members, 1/3 of which are to be elected politicians and 2/3 of which are to be chosen, wait for it, at random by a polling company to decide on a report for our consideration. Now, frankly, that is an idiotic gimmick. There is no need for us, when we have a constitution, jurisprudence in books, reports on it to beat the band, to now sit down with an emasculated body consisting of 1/3 party politicians who will be well organised and given their agenda from their political bosses, and 2/3 sheep brought in to pose as public opinion in this matter. That is not the way in which a constitution should be changed. The Constitution is not a test bench for gimmickry or experiment. It's difficult to change precisely because it is designed to be a permanent guarantee of our rights. It's not a billboard site for poseurs and political shape throwers. For instance, I'll give you another example. Changing the term of the presidency to 5 years is a total gimmick. What was wrong with Mary Robinson's 7 years? What was wrong with Mary McAleese's first 7 years or her second? Why should there be a coincidence of Dáil elections and presidential elections? What is the purpose of that? Why should we not have somebody who outlasts governments and deals with them as a broker on the part of the people with a separate and quite distinguished mandate, which will not be confused in the context of the same election or the same outing? Now, the idea, all I can say is this. The process of consultation and devising reform of the Constitution can't be left solely to the people who brought you the first set of disastrous election laws for the Senate. And those of us who now believe in reforming the Senate should take up the challenge of protecting it. And I conclude by saying this. I went through the whole process of devising a constitution without the Senate because I was asked to do it. I believed that the present Senate was dysfunctional. I had the unique experience in my life of realising, after 10 years of interacting with the Senate, or 8 years of interacting with the Senate, both as Attorney General and as Minister, that it brought value to the Irish democratic system, that it increased the scrutiny of legislation, in our Oireachtas. And I came to the conclusion that my original opposition to the Senate was wrong. I did it over many years, and I put in the hard work to devise a document which suggested the contrary. And I do believe that now those who propose the abolition of the Seanad should tell you precisely how this new slimmed-down Dáil, composed of the people you see in it, is going to deliver for you an enhanced Irish democracy. And I ask you to consider, by contrast, whether a chamber which has had Yeats in it, which has had Gareth Fitzgerald, John Kelly, Catherine McGuinness, Gordon Wilson, and others, that all of those people have brought something to our democracy, and not the contrary. And to ask you, therefore, to hold back your judgment and consider the issues, and to say to yourselves, as has been suggested to you here this evening, over the next year, I will be a good citizen. I will consider this question carefully from beginning to middle to end, and I will not be presumed upon by a political elite which is trying, in effect, to entrench the power of gone-bean politics in Ireland. Thank you very much.